There are 15 people on death row in the state of Missouri. Terrence Anderson, 22 years on death row. Abby Rainwater, a high school student in Poplar Bluff, Missouri, and Terrence Anderson started dating in February 1996 when she was just 16 years old and he was 21. Abby fell pregnant with Anderson's child that summer. Anderson was then extended a welcome invitation to move in with her parents, Stephen and Debbie Rainwater. After moving in with them, Anderson started skipping work at a nearby furniture shop and hanging out late. In the end, he was let go from his employment in December 1996. Abby was thrown against a wall by Anderson the same month after he had grabbed her by the neck. Terrence moved in with his mother when Abby's parents urged him to leave. After Kira, Abby and Anderson's daughter was born on April 18, 1997, Anderson physically assaulted Abby twice. He threatened Abby during the second of these assaults that if she told anybody about what he had done to her, he would kill everyone who resided with her, make her watch him kill the baby, and then he would kill both her and himself. Abby informed her parents of what had happened the following morning, July 24, 1997, and then proceeded to the courthouse to obtain a restraining order against Anderson. Later that day, Abby called Anderson to let him know about the restraining order, telling him that he was not permitted to see her and that the court would handle arrangements for his visitation with the child. Then Anderson stated he knew what needed to be done. Anderson went to a friend's house late that afternoon to get a .357 caliber Magnum revolver. Abby spent that evening at home with Stacy Turner and Amy Doris, two of her adolescent friends. The group that night included baby Kira, Abby's sister Whitney, 10 years old, and her parents as well. When they heard knocking on the back door, Abby, Stacy, and Amy were in the basement. One of the girls peeked out of the tiny windows next to the door, but she was unable to see anyone. They informed Stephen Rainwater after going upstairs. While he glanced out an upper window, he instructed them to return downstairs to check if it happened again. After about a minute, the back door was again knocked on, but Mr. Rainwater did not see who it was. He took up a gun and surveyed the yard, but he once more failed to spot anyone. He entered the house again and set the weapon in the master bedroom's corner. Stephen Rainwater then began patrolling the neighborhood in an effort to spot any unusual people or vehicles. The doorbell at home rang. Abby, Stacy, Amy, and Whitney approached the door and looked out the nearby little windows. They observed Anderson clutching a weapon as he stood in front of the door. Anderson then kicked in the door, shattering its frame, as the girls screamed and retreated from it. Abby was told to flee by Debbie Rainwater. Abby and Whitney left the house through the back door. Abby went to a neighbor's house to ask the neighbor to contact the police, and Whitney soon stopped running once she was outside. Stacy Turner remained at home and hid in a closet. Amy Doris stayed in the house close to Debbie Rainwater. Anderson approached Debbie, who was holding the infant while standing next to a couch. She was about to be killed. Anderson yelled at her while pointing a gun at her. She bowed her head and pleaded for her life. Anderson fired the gun while pressing it up against her back. The shot quickly killed her. In order to get Abby and the others to come out from hiding, Anderson then took Amy Doris, who had just witnessed the murder, and led her outdoors. Whitney heard the gunshot and returned inside to find Anderson standing in front of the home while Kira was sobbing. Her mother's lifeless body was discovered on top of the infant. The 10-year-old lifted her mother's body and pulled out the baby from underneath, then tried to hide inside the house. But Anderson managed to track down Whitney and grabbed Kira. After that, Anderson and Whitney made their way to the front yard, where Amy was still present. Anderson, who was clutching Kira, threatened that if Abby did not emerge, he would shoot the infant in the head. Anderson observed Stephen Rainwater heading home in his car. In order to prevent him from spotting Kira, Whitney, and Amy, Anderson led them around to the side of the house and threatened to shoot them if they tried to flee. Anderson approached Stephen Rainwater while still carrying Kira and struck up a conversation with him. He then killed Stephen by shooting him in the forehead. Anderson then returned inside the residence and gave Whitney the task of looking for survivors. Whitney observed Stacy hiding in the bathroom of the master bedroom but kept it a secret. When 2 police officers arrived at the house, they discovered Stephen Rainwater dead. Afterwards, they observed Anderson opening a window in Abby's bedroom. Anderson used the infant as a human shield in front of him while waving the revolver in the cops' general direction and yelling at them to drop their weapons. Anderson was ordered by the officers to lay down his firearm, but he resisted and yelled at them to lower their rifles repeatedly. Anderson eventually emerged from the home without the firearm he had been displaying and surrendered after additional officers had arrived and circled the residence. William Theodore Boliak Jr., 38 years on death row. Boliak was residing in Linda Turner's house in August 1983. In addition to Turner, Boliak's mistress Jill Harless, Turner's brother Don Anderson, and Vernon Waite also lived there. Jody Harless stayed at the Turner home while traveling to see her sister Jill. Boliak, Waite, Anderson, and Jody Harless held up acquaintance Stan Gray's house for a robbery one Friday night. After that, out of dread for Gray and his companion's revenge, Boliak bought a 12-gauge shotgun and Waite bought a .41 sawed-off shotgun. Waite and Boliak started debating the need for getting rid of witnesses to the robbery. Both of them and the Harless sisters departed Kansas City the following Monday after learning that the police wanted to talk with Gray. They were persuaded by Boliak to travel to Thayer, Missouri, where they hid out with Boliak's parents. On the way, they looted a booze store in Nevada. They stopped for the night at a rest area on Route M in Oregon County. The vehicle came to a stop and Jody Harless exited. Boliak pulled out the shotgun from the car and shot her as she was making her way back to the car. She held her abdomen but kept moving in the direction of the car. She started to beg Boliak for help. He shot Harless once more after Waite had seized her and knocked her to the ground. Boliak explained to the victim's sister that the second shot was fired into the victim's mouth and neck to make it impossible to identify the body. In Decatur, Illinois, on September 6, 1983, Boliak was detained for an armed robbery of a gas station that had occurred earlier in the day. He was in possession of the shotgun and shells he had used to kill Jody Harless when he was taken into custody. Boliak managed to get out of detention, but was found again. Jody Harless's body was found on September 10, 1983, 28 feet from Highway M in Oregon County by a rancher riding his fence line. 2 live shotgun shells and 2 spent shells were found nearby by police investigators. The victim's decaying body could not have been identified visually. Dental records were required. She had been shot in the head. Boliak argued during the trial that he did not realize the gun was loaded when he fired the first shot. He said that Waite fired the second shot. Boliak was given the death penalty after the jury found him guilty of murder in the first degree. Christopher Collings, 11 years on death row. Collings was found guilty of first-degree murder in the 2007 killing of Rowan Ford by a jury. The girl was abducted from her Stella, Missouri home and carried to Berry County, where she was essayed and killed. In McDonald County, a cave contained her body. The prosecution said in court that Collings had essayed Ford before killing her and concealing her body in Fox Cave with Ford's stepfather, David Spears. A sheriff's deputy on his way to work discovered Rowan's body in a sinkhole 1 week after she vanished on a whim. The girl was strangled with a rope or a cord. Brian Dorsey, 14 years on death row. In 2008, a jury in Boone County convicted Brian Dorsey of 2 charges of first-degree murder and sentenced him to death. In March 2008, he acknowledged killing his cousin Sarah Bonney and her husband Ben on December 23, 2006, at their new Bloomfield residence. As Sarah and Ben Bonney slept, Dorsey killed them with a shotgun. He then stole cash, her car, and other property to sell off in order to cover his drug bills. He also essayed his cousin's body and then covered her torso and genitalia in bleach. The following day, Sarah Bonney's parents discovered their corpses, and on December 26, 2006, Dorsey surrendered himself in. Jesse Driscoll, 9 years on death row. Driscoll, a resident of Lebanon, was given the death penalty in 2013 for the murders of Colleen Wilson, 76 years old, and Johnny Wilson, 82 years old, who were killed at their house not far from Lebanon. On July 26, 2010, the couple had just celebrated their 59th wedding anniversary when they caught Driscoll breaking into the home. Driscoll shot Colleen Wilson after essaying her, then killed Johnny Wilson by forcing a plastic bag down his mouth. Richard Emery, 6 months on death row. An individual found guilty of killing his girlfriend, her mother, and 2 children in 2018 had the jury recommend the death penalty for him. On December 28, 2018, Emery shot his girlfriend, Kate Caston, 39 years old, Caston's mother, Jane Mokel, 61 years old, and the kids, Jonathan, 10 years old, and Zoe, 8 years old. He shot Kate Caston after she asked him to leave as the couple argued, according to the prosecution. Then, according to authorities, he smashed through a door to the bedroom where Caston's mother, Jane Mokel, had locked herself along with her 2 grandkids, Jonathan and Zoe. He shot them all at close range. In order to eliminate witnesses, Emery killed Mokel, Zoe, and Jonathan, shot at police, kidnapped a woman, and stabbed her 7 times, according to Assistant Prosecutor Phil Groenweg. All of this was done in the name of self-preservation, he continued. David Hosier, 9 years on death row. For the 2009 murder of Jefferson City resident Angela Gilpin, David Hosier was found guilty of first-degree murder and armed criminal action. According to court records, Hosier had a relationship with Gilpin, a married lady. The relationship between Angela and her husband Rodney was restored in August 2009. In September 2009, according to the prosecution, Hosier broke into Angela Gilpin's apartment and shot both her and her husband to death. After the killings, the Jefferson City police discovered Angela Gilpin's purse contained an application for a protective order against Hosier. Additionally, she had a paper in her purse that expressed her concern that Hosier may shoot both her and her husband. Johnny Johnson, 18 years on death row. In St. Louis County, Johnson was found guilty of murdering 6-year-old Cassandra Williamson by beating her to death on July 26, 2002. When he killed Cassie, Johnson was 24 years old. He had been invited to spend the night on the couch of Casey's father's residence on Benton Street in Valley Park. In an abandoned glass factory's maze of tunnels, disused ovens, and underground rooms, Johnson led Cassie away from the house and down the street. Johnson eventually confessed to killing Cassie with bricks and a large rock after she rejected his attempts toward intimate relations, according to the authorities. He cleaned himself up in the Merrimack River before going back to the Benton Street residence to get a pack of cigarettes. Johnson is scheduled to die by lethal injection on August 1st at the Bonne Terre prison. Charles Matenia, 38 years on death row. Due to his involvement in the 1984 slayings of Daisy Nash, 72 years old, and Luana Bailey, 70 years old, Charles Matenia was sentenced to death in Missouri. Prior to her passing, Matenia had lived with Nash for around 7 years. Matenia was still living with Nash at the time of the killings, and he was 25 years old. He was accused of essaying Luana Bailey twice in September 1983. After she filed a complaint, he was charged with those crimes in December of the same year. Bailey withdrew the charges in February and said she wouldn't testify against Matenia. The evidence suggested that his anger at having been detained and charged in connection with these crimes was the driving force behind the murders. After spending the day with his sister and brother-in-law, Matenia returned home sometime after midnight on April 24, 1984. As soon as he entered the house, he got into a fight with Nash, the 72-year-old woman. During the fight, he hit the 72-year-old woman in the face, knocking her to the floor. Then, after kicking and beating her, he stabbed her several times. Matenia informed Bailey that he had killed Nash shortly after riding his bike the 2 blocks to her house. Bailey attempted to call Nash, but in the meantime, Matenia went to get a butcher knife. Bailey tried to run when he came back, but Matenia fatally stabbed her in the back. Vincent McFadden, 18 years on death row. Todd Franklin had testified against 2 of the 6 deuces McFadden's crew, and they had been imprisoned. 2 young males chased Franklin, 19 years old, to a home where people were working on July 3, 2002, in the 6200 block of Lexington Avenue in Pine Lawn, a St. Louis suburb. The witnesses later recognized McFadden and Michael Douglas as the suspects. According to eyewitnesses, McFadden shot the victim after taking the firearm away from Douglas and complaining that Franklin was still alive after Douglas shot him. Leslie Addison, 18 years old, was fatally shot on May 15, 2003, just a few blocks from the location of Franklin's killing 10 months earlier, following an altercation with McFadden, during which he instructed her to leave Pine Lawn. Eva Edison, the sister of Leslie, dated McFadden, and the two had a child together. Eva Edison was hiding in some bushes when she witnessed her sister beg McFadden not to shoot her. The victim had received a gunshot wound to the head and under the chin. Roosevelt Pollard, 37 years on death row. On December 12, 1985, Pollard made the decision to travel to Arkansas to see family. In his car, he took Maurice Alexander, Michael Hammond, and Robert Sands on a trip down Interstate 55 from St. Louis. The car battery died when he was on the road. From his truck, Pollard took a .22 caliber automatic rifle, which he then loaded with ammo. While Pollard and Hammond looked for another battery, Pollard brought the loaded gun with them. At a nearby farm, they discovered the battery in a car. They returned to his car with the battery after getting it. They departed down Interstate 55 once more after Pollard had returned with the firearm to his vehicle. He left the highway at the rest stop close to Steele, Missouri, after one of the tires eventually went flat. Without a spare tire, Alexander and Hammond traveled to a nearby service station with Howard Henry, the rest area's maintenance worker, to buy a new tire. Richard Alford, the victim, pulled into the rest area in his brand new 1984 Pontiac Bonneville and parked one place away from Pollard's vehicle not long after Alexander and Hammond went to get a new tire. Pollard informed Sands that he intended to purchase the car and that he wanted it. While waiting for Alford to get back to his car, Pollard took the loaded gun out of the vehicle. He hid in the space between the two cars and shot Alford through the window, turned and glanced at Sands, then turned back and shot Alford 2 more times. Alford's body was removed from the driver's seat by Pollard, who then got in the car and left with it. Pollard went back to see whether his companions had made it back with the replacement tire 12 to 13 minutes later. They hadn't, so Pollard left the rest stop on the northbound side of Interstate 55 once more in Alford's automobile. After leaving, Pollard and his pals made a stop in Blytheville, Arkansas, where they stayed the night. Pollard was wiping the blood off a ring that had been stolen from the victim's finger. Later, he sold it for cash in a pawn shop. Alford's body was discovered nearby in a drainage ditch beneath an Interstate 55 flyover. After being deemed mentally incompetent, Roosevelt Pollard's execution was stayed. He is still eligible for the death penalty since the court may reconsider his death sentence if his mental condition improves. Lance Shockley, 14 years on death row. Shockley was given the death penalty for the 2005 slaying of Missouri State Trooper Sergeant Carl Dwayne Graham Jr. Judge David Evans of the 37th Judicial Circuit delivered the verdict. According to the prosecution, Shockley ambushed Graham as he was in his driveway. Graham had looked into a tragic car accident where Shockley allegedly fled after being involved. Graham was shot March 20th as he stepped out of his cruiser near Van Buren, Missouri. He was hit once by a rifle bullet and then at least once by a shotgun blast, authorities said. Michael Tisius, 21 years on death row. In 2001, Tisius was found guilty of first-degree murder in the deaths of Jason Acton and Leon Egley, 2 Randolph County jailers. After Tisius and Roy Vance's girlfriend, Tracy Bullington, unsuccessfully attempted to release Vance, the 2 deputies were killed. Tisius attempted to get off of death row and receive a life sentence in 2010, but jurors upheld the death penalty. The court set the execution of Tisius for the 24-hour period beginning at 6 p.m. on June 6, 2023. Marcellus Williams, 21 years on death row. One August night in 1998, a suburban St. Louis doctor returned home to discover his wife's lifeless body after suffering 43 butcher knife stab wounds. Before the St. Louis County prosecuting attorney revealed that a laptop computer and other items taken in a home invasion led them to a burglar and armed robber named Marcellus Williams, Felicia Gale's murder had gone unsolved for more than a year. 2 informants, according to the Post-Dispatch, provided information to the authorities. From the crime scene, there was no tangible proof that Williams was involved. Gail's body was discovered on a freshly cleaned rug, and hairs collected from her shirt and the rug did not belong to Williams, Gail, or her husband. Gail's fingernails were found to contain skin and blood that had not come from Williams. Williams and the emergency personnel's shoe size did not correspond to the blood footprints left at the site either. Craig Michael Wood, 5 years on death row. Wood was convicted of first-degree murder for the 2014 kidnapping and killing of 10-year-old Haley Owens in Springfield. The Springfield residence of Craig Michael Wood is where Haley's body was discovered. It was kept in the home's basement in 2 trash bags inside of a plastic storage container. She had been shot in the back of the head after being assayed. She had scars on her wrists from having been tied up at some point. Wood is seen on camera throwing away Haley's clothing in a dumpster. Additionally, there is video showing him making 2 different purchases of liquid plumper and 2 bottles of bleach. That is all for today, guys. Please subscribe to the channel if you like my videos. Have a lovely day.